The mansion's security cameras never lied. But what Margaret Sullivan saw on the screen that Tuesday afternoon would shatter everything she thought. She knew about trust, loyalty, and the man she'd employed for 3 years. Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped her phone, zooming in on the live feed from her estate's south garden. There he was, Carlos Mendez, her gardener, crouched low beside the old oak tree with her 2 children, Emma and Daniel. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The kids were supposed to be with their tutor. Carlos was supposed to be trimming the hedges on the north side of the property. Instead, they were huddled together, heads bent in obvious secrecy, passing something between them that she couldn't quite make out. Since her husband Robert's death 2 years ago, Margaret had built walls around her family, tall, impenetrable walls constructed from suspicion and fear. She'd fired 2 nannies for minor infractions, changed the security codes monthly, and vetted every contractor, teacher, and service person who came near her children. The $140 million Robert had left behind made them targets, she reasoned. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. But Carlos had seemed different. He was quiet, hard-working, and kept his distance. He arrived at dawn, tended the sprawling gardens with meticulous care, and left before dinner. He never asked for advances on his paycheck, never made small talk, never tried to befriend the family. That invisible boundary had made Margaret comfortable enough to keep him on staff. Until now. Margaret's attorney had warned her just last month about a case in Greenwich where a groundskeeper had befriended a wealthy widow's children, only to use that relationship to gain access to financial information. The man had stolen over $2 million before anyone noticed. The memory sent ice through her veins as she watched. Carlos handed something small to 8-year-old Emma, who clutched it to her chest like treasure. She was already moving, her Louboutin heels clicking sharply against the marble floors as she strode through the house, past the grand staircase with its crystal chandelier, through the formal dining room where she and Robert had once hosted governors and business magnates, and out the French doors that led to the garden. Her breath came in short, angry bursts. How dare he! How dare he approach her children behind her back? The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Margaret crossed the perfectly manicured lawn. She could hear their voices now, Carlos speaking in his gentle, accented English, Daniel's excited 11-year-old voice interrupting with questions. As she rounded the oak tree, the 3 of them froze. "Mom!" Emma jumped, guilt washing over her young face. Daniel's eyes went wide, and Carlos slowly stood, brushing dirt from his worn jeans. In the harsh daylight, Margaret could see how threadbare his clothes were, how sun-weathered his face had become. He couldn't have been older than 35, but hard work had aged him. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly, his dark eyes meeting hers with something she couldn't quite read. Resignation, perhaps, or disappointment. "What exactly is going on here?" Margaret's voice came out colder than she intended, but fear had a way of freezing her words. "Emma, Daniel, step away from Mr. Mendez right now." "But, Mom," Daniel started. "Now." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her children recognized the tone and reluctantly moved to her side. Margaret placed a protective hand on each of their shoulders. "What were you giving them?" she demanded, her gaze fixed on Carlos. Carlos looked down at his calloused hands, then back at the children, a sad smile crossing his face. "Perhaps it is better if I go, Mrs. Sullivan. I will get my tools. Answer my question first. What were you giving my children?" Her grip tightened on Emma's shoulder. Emma squirmed free and held out her small palm. In it lay a smooth, ordinary river stone, the kind you could find anywhere. But painted on its surface in meticulous detail was a tiny blue butterfly. Its wings spread in mid-flight. The artistry was remarkable, each scale visible, each antenna perfectly curved. "I don't understand," Margaret said, her anger faltering. "He's teaching us to paint rocks," Daniel explained, pulling a similar stone from his pocket, this one featuring a bright red cardinal. "Carlos paints them for his daughter. We saw him working on them during lunch last week and asked if he'd show us how." Margaret's mind spun. "Your daughter?" Carlos nodded slowly. "Sophia, she is 6 years old. She lives in Guatemala with my mother. I have not seen her in 3 years." His voice remained steady, but Margaret caught the slight tremor in his jaw. "I send money home every month. It is enough for food, for school, for medicine when she is sick. But Sophia, she loves beautiful things. So I paint these stones and mail them to her. Every week a new one. It is all I can give her from so far away. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She released her children's shoulders and took a step back, suddenly seeing everything differently. The secret meetings, the careful way Carlos handled something small and precious, the children's guilty expressions. None of it meant what she'd thought. The kids wanted to make some too, Carlos continued, addressing the ground rather than Margaret's eyes. To understand what it is like, I think, to give something made with your own hands to someone you love. I should have asked your permission first. That was wrong. I apologize. Emma held up her butterfly stone again. I wanted to make one for Daddy, she whispered. Something beautiful to put by his picture. Carlos said that's what people in his country do. They make art to remember the people they love. Margaret's carefully constructed walls began to crack. When was the last time her children had mentioned their father without her prompting? When was the last time she'd seen them engaged in something creative? Something meaningful? She'd filled their days with tutors and structured activities, convinced that rigorous supervision equaled good parenting, but she'd forgotten to let them be children. She'd forgotten to let them grieve in their own way. Mrs. Sullivan, Carlos said gently, I am truly sorry. I know you are protective of your children. This is good. This is what a mother should be. I will pack my things. No. The word escaped before Margaret fully processed it. No, please don't. Go. She looked at her children. Really? Looked at them and saw something in their faces she hadn't seen in months. A lightness. A spark of genuine joy. I'm sorry. I jumped to conclusions. I've been so afraid of people taking advantage of us that I stopped seeing the good in anyone. Carlos studied her carefully, as if trying to determine whether she meant it. How long since you've seen Sophia? Margaret asked, her voice softer now. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. He didn't have to calculate. He knew. And you send her painted rocks. It is not much, Carlos admitted. But I cannot afford to visit. The visa fees, the plane ticket, the time away from work, it would cost months of wages. So instead, I send these small things and hope she knows her father thinks of her every day. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. A door opening that she'd locked tight after Robert's death. She'd been so consumed by her own grief and fear that she'd stopped recognizing loss in others. This man who had so little still found ways to give. These simple painted stones represented more love than all the expensive toys and gadgets she'd bought her, children to fill the void their father had left. Come with me, Margaret said suddenly. All of you. She led them back into the house, through the corridors that suddenly felt too large and too empty, to Robert's study. She hadn't been able to bring herself to change anything in here. His books still lined the shelves, his reading glasses still sat on the desk. From a drawer, she pulled out her laptop and opened it. I want you to tell me about Sophia, she said to Carlos. Everything? Her favorite color, her favorite food, what makes her laugh. And then I want you to help me book 3 plane tickets to Guatemala. Carlos stared at her, confusion and hope warring on his face. I do not understand. 3 tickets, Margaret repeated. 1 for you and 2 for my children and me. We're going to meet Sophia, and we're going to make sure you see your daughter. Not just this once, but regularly. Consider it a benefit of your employment. Paid family visits twice a year. Mrs. Sullivan, I cannot accept... You can, and you will. Margaret surprised herself with the firmness in her voice, but also with the tears gathering in her eyes. My children need to understand that wealth isn't about what you keep for yourself. It's about what you can do for others, and I need to remember what my husband always told me, that the measure of a person isn't in their bank account, but in their heart. Emma and Daniel pressed close, looking at the computer screen as Margaret began searching for flights. Carlos stood frozen, his paint-stained hands covering his mouth, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Besides, Margaret added, glancing at her children, I think Emma and Daniel should meet the little girl who inspired such beautiful art. Maybe they can paint some stones together? 3 weeks later, Margaret stood in a small village in the Guatemalan highlands, watching Carlos sweep his daughter into his arms. Sophia's delighted shriek pierced the air as she wrapped her small arms around his neck. Refusing to let go, Emma and Daniel stood beside Margaret, holding paper bags filled with painted stones they'd spent hours creating, butterflies and birds and flowers, each one a small masterpiece of love and effort. As Sophia finally released her father and approached Margaret's children with shy curiosity, Margaret felt something long dormant stir within her: connection, purpose, the understanding that protecting her children didn't mean building walls. It meant teaching them to recognize the walls others faced and helping to tear them down. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the 5 of them together, Carlos beaming as he held Sophia's hand, Emma showing the little girl their painted treasures, Daniel already chattering away in the broken Spanish he'd been frantically learning. This photo would join the others on the mantel at home, a reminder that sometimes the most shocking thing isn't betrayal, it's discovering that humanity and kindness still exist in unexpected places, if only you're brave enough to look. And on a smooth river stone that would eventually sit beside Robert's photograph, Margaret would later paint her own humble creation: a small open door with light streaming through.